And in this video we're going to be creating a currency conversion tool using the Google Calculator API. Now it sounds quite scary, but it's actually relatively easy. We're going to be using a specific URL for the Calculator API. It's relatively straightforward to go ahead and just specify some variables in the string, and then you retrieve a value back, which looks quite scary. It looks like this. You can see here that I'm converting 100 pounds, so Great British pounds, to United States dollars. So you can see we've got a result here with some bits of information in here, blah 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 blah. We're just going to be taking out the parts that we need, so this and this. Okay, so we're not going to be returning the value as an integer. I'll leave that up to you to do if you want, but what we are going to be retrieving is this part here and then this part here. So let's go ahead and take a look at how this works. So in here I've created a form, which we're going to be doing at the last part of the tutorial. So we're going to be creating the functionality behind this first, and then a bit later on we're going to be creating the form itself. So the first value that we pass in here is the amount. So let's say I wanted to convert 100, and we'll say pounds, so GBP. And I want to convert that to dollars, so I'd say USD. When I click submit, you can see that we've got 100 British pounds equals 158 US dollars. So we've essentially just taken this part of the information and this part of the information, and we've passed it back through and used it. Now we're going to be creating a function to deal with this, and this is going to allow us to, reuse this function wherever we feel necessary. We're also going to be returning these specific values, which makes it a lot easier to go ahead and manipulate the data later on, instead of just doing it in a linear fashion. So we're going to go ahead now and take a look at start writing the code. Okay, so we're over into our text editor. We're going to start writing out the skeleton of our function, deciding what arguments or what parameters we want to pass through to it. Then we're going to take a look at actually doing something. Now the first thing to do is go ahead and type this into your browser. You're going to need this exact URL, and let's just talk a moment about the structure. So from here up until here is just static. That will never really change, not at least in this tutorial. Then the first variable we've got here is the amount. The second variable we've got here is the currency that you want to convert from. So essentially we're saying 100 pounds, and then after this equals and question mark, we want the currency that we're converting to. So for example, at the moment we've got 100 British pounds, that's equal to 158 US dollars. If I wanted to change this to 100 US dollars to pounds, you can see that it does it the other way around. So as long as you're comfortable with substituting this variable here, which we're eventually going to allow our users to type in themselves, and this value here, then it's relatively straightforward. Now if we say, for example, type a currency in that doesn't exist, so a currency code that doesn't exist, for example GBPP, you can see that we get this string returned here with an error there, and we get nothing here, and nothing here. So we get no input and no, or no from and no to. So we can use that to determine whether the user input is wrong. If they've typed in a currency code that's either not recognized or doesn't exist. So we've got nothing in our browser here. We're going to go ahead and start writing out our function. So I'm going to call the function currency underscore convert. So I'm going to write out the function as we would normally. Now inside here we're going to need three parameters. The first one is going to be the amount. The second one is going to be from, and the third one is going to be to. Now this is going to be string data, this is going to be string data, and this is going to be an integer. Although it can be string data. It doesn't really matter how these variables are formatted. If they have quotation marks around them. Obviously GBP and well, the from and to currencies will need strings because they do contain characters, but the amount doesn't really matter because we're going to be injecting it into this URL. Now we're going to be using the PHP file get contents function. And we're going to be storing that in a variable called result. So once this function's called, it'll look something like this. So currency underscore convert, we'll need an amount, so say 100, and we want to say convert $100 to Great British pounds. So this is how we're going to be calling the function. And our function is going to return a few values, but we'll get to that later. So the result is going to be we're going to need to use file get contents, so file underscore get underscore contents, and in here we need to specify the URL. So let's go ahead and be lazy, or efficient if you like, and just go ahead and copy this and paste it into here. So remember, we're putting it in between single quotation marks, pasting that in, and we need to substitute the variables that the user, or we here, are going to pass through to the function. So the amount is here, so I'm going to go ahead and escape the data. I'm going to type a dot to concatenate and say amount, and I'm going to concatenate on the rest of the string. So we've got the URL that always remains static, this part of it. Then we've got concatenating on the amount. Now we need to concatenate on the from variable. So we can just do that straight after here, so from there. So there's no space or comma or anything required, so we just do amount from. So this will now look 100 USD with no space. Now at the end we can just go ahead and concatenate on 2. Okay. So now that we've done that, we have retrieved the file contents of our currency conversion. So if I go ahead now and just echo out result, and I go ahead and refresh in here, you can see that we've got the result back from Google. Although we're not on the Google API page, we get exactly the same result, and we now have this accessed as string data. So what we can do is we can now manipulate this in any way we want. And the way we're going to be manipulating it is breaking it up. So how do we break this data up? Well, let's take a careful look at it. The best way to look at things like this is we want to notice certain patterns. So we've got a quotation mark here and a quotation mark here, and then we've got a quotation mark here, and we've also got a quotation mark here. So what we can actually do is we can break this up by using the explode function. So I'm going to create a new variable called expl, just for explode, and I'm going to use the explode function. What do we want to explode by? Well, we want to explode by a quotation mark. And what data do we want to explode? Well, we want to explode the result. Now what this will do is it will break it up into data based on what comes before and after these certain points, and this is the point that we've chosen. So if I go ahead and choose print R, which is going to show us the contents of an array, now explode will now be an array because we've exploded that data, so expl. When I go ahead and refresh, you can see that we've got an array now with certain bits of data in. Now what's interesting is that we've exploded around them quotation marks, and we've got 100 US dollars, which is remember the currency that we're converting from. And then in here you can see that we've got a single piece of data under key 3 of the result. So key 1 contains the from, and key 3 contains the to. So now all we need to do is, if we know anything about arrays, which hopefully we do, we can use square brackets and we can reference the key that we want to. So in this case we want 1 and 3. So let's go ahead and do that now. Let's just sort of test this out first. So I'm going to go ahead and echo out expl 1. That'll access key 1. So now when I refresh, you can see we've got this piece of data. When I change this to 3, you can see that we've got this piece of data. So we can return this from the function. Now we're not going to be echoing anything out from the function. We want to return an array that contains these 2 bits of information. And that means that then we can use them however we want. So we've got a problem. We need to first of all check if this has errored or not. So let's go ahead and create an if statement, and we'll say else something. So the first thing we want to check for is whether this has returned an error or not. If it has returned an error, we want to return false. Otherwise, we want to return values. So inside of here, we want to check if expl1 or expl3 equals nothing. And the reason for this is, I'll just show you, print r, expl, and let's just comment this out here. So let's go ahead and pass in some false values. So we'll just, pass in some currency codes that don't exist. You can see now that 1 is empty. Remember earlier when we saw it in here, when we typed in something wrong, we get this empty string here and empty string here. And 3 is empty as well. So we want to essentially say if either of these two are empty, then we want to return an error. So what do we want to do? If expl1 is equal to nothing, or expl2 is equal to nothing. Now if you provide one incorrect currency code, these will both equal nothing, but it's always a good idea to cover both bases. So if we do have an error, we want to return false, which we'll be checking for a bit later on. Otherwise we want to go ahead and return this data. So we want to return an array, and we're going to have 2 keys in this array. The first one, or 2 elements of this array. The first one's going to be the from, and the second one's going to be the to. Now we already know them. It's expl1 and comma expl2. So now we've returned an array with these 2 values. So let's go ahead and do a print r on this function, because we've now returned an array. So print r. Oh, see. And let's see what result we get. So when we refresh, you can see we've got key 0 has 100, and wow, that's 3 there. Sorry, so it's 1 and 3. When I refresh, you've got $100 US and 63 British pounds. So we can now use these however we want. We can say, 63 British pounds is $100, or $100 is 63. We can chop them up and convert them to integer, whatever we want to do with them. We've got these 2 separate pieces of data. We're not echoing anything out from our function. So in the next part of the tutorial, we're going to look at how we create this form that's going to allow our users to create or search for a currency conversion, so convert one currency to another.